Welcome back.
I'm Nicole.
I'm Megan.
And you are currently tuned into the Synchronicity Podcast, where we change your brain to change your life. We pretty much inform you of things that you inherited from your childhood, ideally problems, and help you become a autonomous adult that allows you to function in society, looking at it from a totally different perspective than what your parents gave you. If you want to know more information about us, you can always binge our podcasts. We have lots of things, lots of podcasts. Check us out on YouTube or work with us. You can head over to synchronicity222.com for more information and more details on what we do.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the 3 types of communication today. And most of them are, well, there's 2 that people pretty much use across the board. And then there's one that's actually the healthy way of communicating. And sadly, it's not really used because most people are in a PTSD response for the majority of their life. And they communicate the way that their parents did, which was basically super dysfunctional. Yeah, and it's funny once, this is a really good podcast to save and listen to multiple times. Because it's super important to get this, especially into your brain, of the different ways people communicate. Because we don't let people be autonomous. We try to control them and manipulate them with games. And so these are the 2 types of games people play. And the third one is actually the healthy way to communicate properly. And again, until I got into this work and met our mentor, I don't think I met anybody, or at least not that I'm aware of, because I was so dysfunctional. Maybe I did meet somebody that did do the healthy way of communicating, but I didn't notice it, or I probably thought that they were crazy. So
even nowadays, people don't negotiate. Like, now that we know this,
yes.
Very few people we run into negotiate.
Yeah, so the healthy way of communicating is negotiation. It's price or prize, right? And it's coming from a place of, this is what I want and need, this is what I want and need, and then you negotiate and create terms that are suitable for both. So both people are giving and taking. It's actually a proper democracy instead of a, totalitarianism or a dictatorship that most people function in. And this goes for parenting too. People are dictators as parents and totalitarian. They teach their children dictatorship and not negotiation. This is a very healthy way to raise children in negotiating. And we'll get into more examples of that, but it's super, super important. I know we were raised in a dictatorship and we didn't have voices, and then we became doormats, and you create a child that's a doormat when you don't negotiate with it, because you're essentially creating a child that doesn't have a voice. And you're also creating a relationship where somebody doesn't have a voice. So negotiation creates an equitable relationship, not an equal, an equitable. We don't believe in equality in relationships. There's an alpha and a beta. So you have an equitable relationship, or a relationship that creates equity. People fight for equality, but equality creates a power struggle in a relationship. You want a giver and a receiver. Masculine gives, feminine receives. So it's just, we have been so programmed and brainwashed with incorrect information. It's actually crazy. And it's, some would say that it was done purposefully, because when you destroy the family, you basically create a power dynamic that the government wins, because people aren't focused on love. They're focused on individualistic, narcissistic needs instead of what's best for the whole. So,
yeah, I mean, overall, there's 3 types of communication, and the majority, I think the first one is the one that you see the most, and it's seduction. And you can pretty much walk into any relationship, any room, any friend group, and there's always a good example of seduction. It's usually the individual that's coming off as passive aggressive, and they use guilt and shame to get what they want. And usually it's very manipulative, sometimes can be very charming, seductive, in that sense. But that individual is coming at it from a power struggle. They're above that person. They're trying to get something, but they're not going about it in a direct way. There is no negotiating in this aspect. It is just purely seduction with guilt and shame. And that can sound many different ways, but majority of the time it's very passive aggressive, indirect.
Well, it's essentially like if you ask your husband for something and he's like, no, you're like, well, don't you want me to be happy? Things like that, right? That's seduction. You're guilting or shaming. You know, people do this all the time, like with children of, you know, be good or Santa Claus isn't going to bring you anything. That's also, that's a little bit of intimidation too, but that is shaming the child that they're bad, right? Or that's not how good children act. That's not what good children do. You know, people aren't going to like you if you
wear that shirt,
act like that.
Yeah.
You know, it's a very, we've all been talked to like that, especially our relationships are basically the same as they were with our parents until we know differently. And so there's a lot of seduction with guilt and shame or passive aggressive behavior. Another really common one is like when somebody doesn't get their way, they're like, oh, well, I didn't really care anyway. It doesn't really matter to me.
That's my favorite.
You know, it's
or
that,
I don't know what you're talking about.
It's guilting.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it's the poor me, kind of like people moping around, or the silent treatment it's still a way of communicating. You're guilting somebody, you're punishing somebody for their behaviors is also seduction with guilt and shame. So, you know, it's a very prevalent part of our society. And when you catch yourself doing it, you know, just be aware that it's a very dysfunctional, codependent way of communicating that isn't clear and concise. It's super evasive. This is an avoidance way of dealing with things. And anxious too. It kind of just depends, but it's not a securely attached human's way of communicating. So when you catch yourself, this is a manipulative behavior that is negative and has negative side effects. You again, and this is exactly how our parents functioned, and they for the majority of it, like especially our dad still functions very much in this. He has no idea, but it's like it's really entertaining to watch it. It's the poor me, like help me. It always reminds me. This specific one always reminds me of that movie, The Bachelor. The Bachelorette. It's like, help me, I'm poor.
She's all drunk on the airplane. We should put that clip in here.
And it's like, no, you're not. Like, you're a grown human.
Yeah, but you see it a lot. Like, not to throw the boomer generation under the bus, but the boomer generation entirely functions in guilt and shame. Like, that is their narrative. They're very passive aggressive in how they go about things, and it's not it's not their fault. Like, their generation before them taught them that.
They don't know any better.
They don't know any better, but you're really seeing it come out in the boomers, and you're starting to see the younger generations go, whoa, this is like not normal. But then, you know, they're trying to change the patterning, but the patterning is very deep in that guilt and shame and victimhood.
Well, I mean, but we're seeing this from the top down. It's not just our parents. It's also the way the government communicates with us, and the way that, like, you see government officials, like, in debates and stuff during presidential, like, the way that they talk to each other. They belittle each other. They're passive-aggressive. They make side comments. They're not respectful and allow other people to be autonomous. They fight like they don't play fair. Yeah. And it's just crazy. It's like guilt, shame, guilt. Like, but people do it in their marriages. They do it to their children. They do it in their friendships. And it's just really unfortunate that is the massive. I mean, even the mass media, right? They use guilt and shame. It was like the vaccines. It's like, well, you know, you're killing people. You're
killing someone's grandparents.
Yeah.
Like, what?
Yeah, I mean,
I remember seeing that everywhere.
It's guilt tactics. It's, shaming. So it's not just in your interpersonal relationships. It's also like our relationship with the mass media and government to the people to the government. There's not, everybody's in a fight for power. Nobody's in a fight for potency. And that's part of the problem. We live in a hedonistic culture that is everybody's in a fight for power and to get one up on the other person and have control, instead of, how do we move humanity into a better place, and how do we make everything better for our children in the future? But instead it's a very like man eat man world, which is crazy to me. But I very much used to be a part of that mindset, and you have to give in order to receive, and you have to know how to receive in order to give. And we don't understand that energy, and negotiation is that energy frequency of like hearing somebody else and then contemplating it and then responding. And it's a give and a take, and a give and a take in communications. And that's an energetic flow, right? The voice is one of the main energy flows between two people. You have your auric field, but how you actually interact with that auric field is, yes, energy, but it's also the voice. That's why the voice is so important. And you see a lot of people with very, TMJ and all sorts of stuff. Go to our German New Medicine if you want to know more about that. But the other communication style is intimidation with fear. And I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. Do it or else. It's that this is big in parenting. Do this or you're not going to eat dinner. Do this or go to your room. Do this or else, right? There's that or else. That's like, it actually unnerves me when I think about it, because it's also so much a part, or used to be a part of like my relationships. Like, oh, you're not acting the way that I want you to, then I'm going to punish you. Like, oh, you're not acting this and this and this way because of my expectations, then I'm done. I don't want to be in this relationship anymore. You're basically throwing a temper tantrum.
Well, and I just want to circle back around for 1 second, and like with the seduction, a lot of times people that are using seduction with guilt and shame, they will cut you off and they will give you no space to talk. And so this is a huge thing in parenting. Like, they'll just cut their children off like right at the knees until their like entire thought is finished. And you see it a lot where people, even you and me, we used to like cut each other off. And it used to be a big thing of like, wait, just listen. And then, but a lot of times people will almost, it's almost like a fear. Actually, it could probably be a part of intimidation as well, where they're like cutting them off mid thought and then being like, no, you're wrong. And things like that. It creates this like inability for a child and another person to have a voice. It actually might be both ways of communication, actually, now that I think about it.
I've never really thought about it. I would consider that more, it would go into speech patterning. Again, I've never really thought about it. But, when you cut somebody off because you think that you're right or that you know better, that's not really a communication tactic. That's just a completely, like, you might as well be hammering somebody into the ground. That's like an annihilation tactic.
It's a third.
You're not even communicating. You're literally you're cutting somebody off at the knees.
Well, so technically, that would be creating shame, because that person then feels like they are wrong.
Or that what you have to say is more important.
Right. And then the intimidation. I don't know, when we were talking about it, I was like, oh, that like actually fits both once I actually express it. In a sense, because then that person no longer has...
That's aggressive. That's not even passive aggressive. That's aggressive behavioral patterning. So it's super masculine. And
so maybe it's not even a communication.
Well, it's probably borderline, like,
asshole.
Okay.
Anyways.
It's
totally
definitely a narcissistic tendency. But it's super common in our culture.
Yeah.
Super, super common.
But it's a lot. We see it a lot. Like, when you were talking about, like, the political debates, like, I remember watching Trump and Kamala, and, like, they just, like, kept interrupting each other. And I was like, no one can actually get a thought out. Like, this is so aggressive.
Side note, almost all politicians are narcissists.
Yes.
If you want that kind of power, you have to have some serious emotional / narcissistic problems. That's just like, I mean, who really wants to have that kind of responsibility? You have to have a God complex. So, that's a whole different ball game of just like a dick measuring contest that is just, I mean, it's literally alpha fight to the death. Yeah. So that's why people cut each other off and da-da-da-da. It's like having to one up. So, I mean, it's probably more intimidation with fear.
Yeah.
Because so I would consider that more intimidation with fear because it's aggressive, right? So seduction with guilt and shame is passive aggressive. Intimidation is aggressive communication tactics. So I would actually say that cutting somebody off mid-sentence is intimidation because you're aggressively pushing yourself. You're not like, oh, well, don't you want me to be happy? Or I didn't really care, which is passive. Mm. So you see that more in like dysfunctional feminine, when intimidation with fear would be cutting somebody off at the knees because it's an aggressive pattern. So it would be more the masculine way of interfacing with somebody. So I'm going to say that that's actually intimidation with fear of I'm right and you're wrong. You're not even like passively telling somebody that they're stupid or you don't like what they're saying. That's aggressively interfacing with somebody.
Well, and I see it a lot of times too, though. If someone is cutting them off, they're usually telling them that they're wrong. Like they're like I don't know. Well, it's almost like a conscious, subconscious like game. Anyways, I completely derailed this entire thing.
You're saying
back into intimidation.
Here we are. You're saying that what I have to say is more important than what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the energy frequency.
That's shaming someone subconsciously, so that it's actually potentially causing them a trauma response.
Well, and again, seduction with guilt and shame and intimidation with fear are
very slightly
different.
Yeah.
It's more of like the intention.
Right.
And they create tension in different ways because intention is tension. But one is like, fuck you or else. And the other one is like, you'll pay for this. So it's a little bit more, right?
One's like psychological warfare and one is like...
One's directly like, I will physically harm you, right?
Yeah.
Remember when our parents were like... would spank us and hit us and things like that. That's intimidation with fear and then becomes physical. So you see how it...
Well, it can ebb and flow. I mean,
they're very similar.
You can go in and out in a full conversation with both of them, and most people have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah, and negotiation is just the healthier way, and it's price or prize because... people that are secure understand that everything has a price. So you check the price tag before you pay it, right? So for example, if your child's throwing a temper tantrum about not wanting to go to bed, you say, okay, babe, like I totally understand your feelings. You make them autonomous. You have every right to feel that way. Are you willing to play for 5 more minutes and I'll play with you? And then after those 5 minutes are up, there's going to be no fussing and you're going to go straight to bed. How does that sound? And this is even a child. You can do this to a child. And they're okay. And then if they fuss, then you say, okay, well, next time we're not going to be able to negotiate this because you're not holding up your end of the bargain. So you're teaching them price or prize. And so in a kid's brain, they go, oh, okay. And they understand that everything is give and take. Everything is give and take. And so when you're in a relationship, when you're negotiating life and things, you're like, okay, well, I want to live in Colorado. You want to live in California. Okay, well, what if we spend 6 months of the year in Colorado and 6 months in California? Do you see how it's give and take? So when we're negotiating, it's a skill set, and this is actually what we teach, and it's very, very important. And people always wonder why Nicole and I get along so well. It's because we negotiate.
Constantly.
People are like, you live together and you work together?
Constant negotiation.
Like, we negotiate all the time.
Constantly.
But yeah, so if you guys want more examples of this, let us know. Let us know what you think. Let us know if you know people in your life that communicate like shit, because we know a lot.
I mean, this is like the baseline of what we do every day.
This
is literally the core thing that we pull people
Everything
out
is communication.
Of all of these patterns, put them into negotiation, and their entire lives change like almost overnight once they start to understand the brain patterning that has been imprinted from childhood, and they start to identify it. And this is really like the core base of understanding like all relationships with mom, dad, lover, partner, kid, all the above. This is truly like the bottom line of it.
Yeah. If you're listening on Instagram, well, you're not on Instagram. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple, like us, leave comments, hang out with us. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, we love to hear them. Please leave a comment, subscribe to us, hang out with us more. Did I miss anything?
If you want to directly message us, you can reach us at synchronicity_sisters. One of us is always manning the page. And until next time, bye.